Here's everything you need to know about drafting on Sleeper, including targets at each position, avoids at each position, general draft strategy, and a mock draft, putting everything together at the end. Now, starting off at quarterback, looking at the elite guys, they are very reasonably priced. Like here, you're able to go Josh Allen at the 2-3 turn. You're able to get Mahomes at the 3-4 turn, which is very interesting because on ESPN, he's a late second, early third round pick. Going over to Lamar, you can get Lamar in the fourth. You can get Jalen Hurts in the third. So on ESPN, I would probably be avoiding those top end quarterbacks, but specifically on Sleeper, I think that this is a spot where it makes a ton of sense to go grab an elite level option, especially because when you look later in the position, you will notice that there are some of these quarterbacks that are pushed up compared to other platforms. Caleb Williams is more expensive on Sleeper than anywhere else. Tua is more expensive on Sleeper than anywhere else. I mean, on Sleeper, he goes to pick 105. On ESPN, he goes to pick 128. Going over, I don't even want to look at the range of guys like Baker Mayfield, Geno Smith, Will Levis. Those should be waiver wire options unless you are playing in a super flex format. So what I would recommend personally is on the Sleeper platform, with the way that these ADPs are lined out, comparing it to every other draft platform, I think you are better off taking the elite level quarterback and then not taking a second, because those second guys are going to be a little more expensive. And if you drafted Josh Allen around 3, then who cares? Just chillax. And if anything goes wrong, if he gets injured during his bye week, you can always go to the waiver wire. Now, going over to running back, this is where things get very different on Sleeper than ESPN and Yahoo. Running backs are decently valued. Running backs are actually good targets in the middle rounds, which is crazy. Now, of course, if you watch our live streams every single night where I'm drafting on Underdog, there you're used to watching me get Kyron Williams in round 3. There you're used to watching me get Joe Mixon, Rachaad White in round 6. I mean, you have phenomenal running back values on Underdog, but it's best ball, right? It's a different overall strategy. It's a completely different draft room. So it's not as simple as just saying, oh yeah, all you do is draft running backs. Now, of course, if you really like those price points, if you want to take those guys on Underdog, we are streaming every single night Underdog drafts as we've done for years. My favorite place to draft. Their best ball, so no time commitment at all during the year. It's how I draft hundreds of teams every year. It's how I won 150,000 on Underdog 2 years ago. And if you use code FLOCK when you sign up to Underdog with the link in the description or comment section, you will get my 2024 rankings, the 2024 ADP consensus cheat sheet, which I'd highly recommend using in your draft. That's what we're making this video off of. Plus, you will get our 2024 fantasy football draft guide, all 3 of which will be updated every week for you until the season starts. And on top of that, you'll get a 50% deposit bonus up to $250 and a Christian McCaffrey special pick'em, more than less than half a total yard for week 1. Definitely take advantage of that with code FLOCK. But anyway, looking at running back here, you'll notice Saquon Barkley on Sleeper goes in round 2, whereas on other platforms, he's a round 1 pick. You'll notice Derrick Henry you can get in round 3. You'll notice here you can get Alvin Kamara round 5, Joe Mixon at the 4-5 turn, Ramondre Stevenson in round 6. And if you compare this to other platforms, Joe Mixon is a 3rd rounder on ESPN. Alvin Kamara goes at the end of the 3rd round on ESPN. So here at running back, where typically I would say if you're drafting on ESPN, Yahoo, you want nothing to do with the running backs in the middle rounds. If you're a really big Najee Harris guy, if you're a really big Ramondre Stevenson guy, if you're a really big Kenneth Walker guy and you want to target a running back in round 5, I think that you can get away with it. And for this reason, I think specifically on Sleeper, you can go ahead and you could potentially take wide receivers early. Now, the reason for this is we go over to the wide receiver position, and if you compare wide receivers in the middle rounds, which is what I'm highly recommending if you're drafting on ESPN, if you're drafting on Yahoo, if you're drafting on NFL Fantasy, please be taking all the wide receivers in the middle rounds, because you're going to get Zay Flowers in round 6. You're going to get Devonta Smith in round 5. It's going to be a great value. Whereas if you look at Sleeper, it's a little bit different. Here, instead of Zay Flowers going in round 6, you're going to have to pay up if you want him. He's going to go at the 4-5 turn. Malik Neighbors is going to pick 39, whereas on ESPN, he goes to pick 53. DJ Moore goes to pick 36, whereas on Yahoo, he goes at 45. Jalen Waddle picked 34, whereas on ESPN, he goes to pick 50. Now, I still really like some of these wide receivers, right? The thing is, Sleeper drafters tend to be a little bit smarter, at least in my experience. So they are going to be targeting those very exciting guys. And what also kind of screws you is if you're looking at the rookie values, depending on your platform, like on Yahoo, you can get Xavier Worthy at 92. On ESPN, you can get Xavier Worthy past pick 100. Freaking ridiculous. That should never happen if you know what your league mates are doing. Here, sleeper, Xavier Worthy goes at pick 76, which I think is still a decent value, but it's a lot more expensive than the other platforms. Rome Odunze goes at pick 69 on sleeper, where he goes in the hundreds on Yahoo and ESPN. So typically we can exploit those ESPN and Yahoo drafters by taking the elite quarterback, the elite tight end, and a couple of running backs early, expecting that we are going to get great wide receiver values in the middle rounds. However, on sleeper, that may not necessarily be the case. You may need to go with a couple wide receivers early because those middle round wide receiver values may not be as guaranteed as they would be on other platforms. And then going over to tight ends, you will notice that the elite tight ends are cheaper on sleeper than other platforms. Here, Travis Kelce is a third round pick on sleeper. He goes in rounds 2, both in ESPN and Yahoo drafts. Mark Andrews goes to pick 48. He goes to pick 40 on ESPN. George Kittle can make it to you in round 6 on sleeper. Evan Ingram down at pick 70. David Njoku 86. Jake Ferguson 88. All three of which are significantly cheaper than ESPN and Yahoo drafts. So I would highly recommend on sleeper to go with the tight end early because you cross-reference this with some of the later round tight ends. Dalton Schultz, more expensive on sleeper. Pat Freiermuth, more expensive. Cole Kmet, more expensive. Luke Musgrave, more expensive. Taysom Hill, more expensive. So tight end's kind of similar to quarterback that I think we can afford to grab an early one. We can afford to grab Mark Andrews there at the end of the 4th, the beginning of the 5th. That way you don't have to take another one of these later round options. The main difference that you're going to have on sleeper compared to other platforms is we can't expect the wide receiver values to be great in the middle rounds. So it maybe serves us a little bit better to go wide receiver early on sleeper rather than running back. Now let's dive into a mock draft so I can show you exactly how you do that. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get this going. We will be at pick 3. Now, pick 3, I think this is a great spot if you were wanting to go with wide receiver early. I was kind of expecting Tyreek Hill to make it to us, but dear God, never mind. This sometimes happens where you have a draft strategy that you need to go through and you need to throw out the window. I was expecting to go wide receiver here in round 1. I was expecting to go with an elite quarterback or possibly tight end at the 2-3 turn. But we are going to have to change gears. We are going to have to change strategies when you get Christian McCaffrey here at pick 3. Now, because we discussed wide receiver values not being as good once we get through the middle rounds on sleeper, I do think that this is a spot where we more likely than not are going to have to at least take one wide receiver at the 2-3 turn. Now, of course, we'll see what this draft room gives us. This looks like it's a heavy wide receiver draft room. As I mentioned, that sleeper possibly is going to be. You have Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, all going before Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson, where I'd recommend if you were drafting on ESPN, Yahoo, NFL Fantasy, to take Breece Hall or Bijan Robinson at picks 4 and 5. But yeah, this looks more like an underdog draft than it does an ESPN draft. So it may be very difficult for us to find wide receiver values that we're extremely excited with, which is why you're kind of stuck taking a few of these wide receivers at the very top. But we'll see what this draft room gives us. You have Drake London off the board at the 205, Devontae Adams 206. Wide receivers freaking flying. Travis Etienne goes here in the 2nd. That's a little bit different than Underdog. Etienne goes in the 4th on Underdog, but regardless, doesn't matter too much here. So let's see what the Jefferson team does. Looks like they auto-draft Sam Laporta. Like I mentioned previously, I really do like getting the elite level tight ends in round 3 with this platform. If we're looking at options here, I am going to take Nico Collins. It's crazy. I would not recommend you taking Nico Collins here at the end of the 2nd if you are drafting on ESPN or Yahoo, but specifically with wide receivers being a little more expensive in this sleeper draft, I think that it makes sense for us to go ahead and take Nico Collins here at the 210. And when we're back up on the clock, we have the option to go Josh Jacobs, who I do really like. But I think we're actually going to take Jalen Waddle instead at the 303. Jalen Waddle is going to go in the 4th round in your ESPN draft. I know this looks a little crazy, but as I mentioned, I do expect that we should be able to get some very solid running back values later. So instead of taking Pacheco, instead of taking Henry here, I think we go with Waddle with the expectation that the running backs that we can find in round 6, 7, and 8 will not be too bad in this draft. Now, I will mention, if this was a different platform, I'm not taking Jalen Waddle here. I would not have taken Nico Collins in the 2nd. Instead, what we would have probably done is I would have taken Devon Achane there in the 2nd round. And then in the 3rd round, I would have potentially gone with an elite level quarterback if specifically this was ESPN, Yahoo. But here, it is going to be a little bit different because these wide receivers are pushed up. Like for instance, Cooper Kupp here at the end of the third. You will find in your Yahoo ESPN drafts, Cooper Kupp sometimes makes it to the 5th. Patrick Mahomes at the 312 here. As I mentioned previously, I think the quarterback values are really nice. What I would absolutely love, if it is possible for us, is if we were somehow able to get Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews at the 4-5 turn. Now, I don't expect that to be super likely. Of course, we'll see what happens. But James Cook goes there in the 4th. Jalen Hurts in the 4th as well. I freaking love Jalen Hurts in round 4. Highly recommend you going Hurts in round 4, regardless of the platform that you're on. Lamar goes in round 4 as well. So our dream of getting Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews all of a sudden does go out the window. But we're still in a range where we're able to potentially get either Trey McBride or Mark Andrews here at the 410 or the 503. Now, McBride goes, so that will change things. And now we can confidently say if Andrews makes it to us here at the 410, I think we would go ahead and we would just take Mark Andrews. But also, you have a falling value in Rachaad White. ESPN drafts, Yahoo drafts, Rachaad White's going to be a round 3 pick. It looks like he can potentially make it to us here at the end of the 4th. Andrews goes, so that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead, we're going to take Rachaad White at the 410. Now, if you were looking at the best available receivers, you had DK Metcalf, Zay Flowers, Tank Dell. I definitely think we can take one of these guys here at the 503. But in my mind, there is a very large gap between Rachaad White and Alvin Kamara. So I kind of wanted to get that running back value before the teardrop was. And I want to remind y'all, I would highly recommend avoiding the running backs in rounds 4, 5, and 6 if you're on ESPN or Yahoo. I think there, the running backs are going to be way too expensive. I would typically not be taking them whatsoever, but this is a very unique situation where you're able to get Rachaad White at the 4-5 turn. Kenneth Walker goes 501. I probably would have taken Walker if he would have made it to us in the 5th, but Zay Flowers off the board. What I think we're going to do here instead is we may get the elite level tight end or the elite level quarterback. You know what? We're going to take the top end quarterback in Anthony Richardson. Going back to what we were mentioning previously with quarterback strategy this year, it does look like the quarterbacks that are going to be in rounds 8, 9, 10, 11, those will be guys that are typically overvalued here in these sleeper drafts. So getting Anthony Richardson, I know obviously this is a quarterback that I have no idea if he's going to be a good real life option, but what I can say is he has all the rushing upside in the world that even if you were to be a bad NFL quarterback, he could still be a good fantasy quarterback. And then obviously if you were to come out here and if he were to be a good real life quarterback with his rushing upside as well, then he can be an elite option in fantasy. Now, I will say for sure, I would prefer getting Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson at the beginning of the 4th rather than Anthony Richardson at the beginning of the 5th. This is more about the quarterbacks that we expect to go right after, such as Joe Burrow goes the pick after us at the 504, where Burrow just simply does not have the rushing upside to potentially hit that ceiling. I mentioned previously, but I think you could have potentially gone Dalton Kincaid if you really wanted to there at the 503. But George Kittle makes it to the 6th round, just like what we were talking about in this video. This is a stressful draft with 10 seconds being the timer. Rome Odunze is 602, just like what we were talking about in the video. This is a platform where the rookie wide receivers are going to be respected. These guys are going to go early. Here, for example, you get Rome in the 6th, whereas Yahoo, the draft that we did yesterday, the guy fell inside he was going in pick 100s. Rashee Rice, 605. Keenan Allen goes 606. So the wide receivers that may make it to us here at the 610 are definitely a lot worse than the options that you would have on ESPN. So you have Terry McLaurin, Jaden Reed. We're on ESPN here at the end of round 6. You could potentially be looking at Tank Dell, Amari Cooper, Zay Flowers. And yeah, Terry McLaurin even goes before us. So a big thing that we were talking about with the wide receivers here being a little less exciting. So if we're going to be looking at all positions, I think what we may actually end up doing is we may take Najee Harris for the reason being that it looks like Jaylen Warren is dealing with the hamstring injury. And I think Najee should be rising up draft boards at this point if Warren's going to miss time. Xavier Worthy goes at the end of the 6th, but there are a couple wide receivers that I think can make it back to us. Now, the tight ends aren't too appealing in this range. You have Bowers, you have David Njoku, but at this point, I think I'd probably pivot over and prefer some of these wide receiver names, such as Calvin Ridley for our third wide receiver. And I think if we whiff on the first, I want to say 6, 7 tight ends. If you can't get Laporta, if you can't get Kelsey, if you can't get Andrews, McBride, Kincaid, Pitts, Kittle, at that point, I think you're probably better off just waiting until later in the draft and finding a couple tight ends that you could potentially look at to pair together in the double-digit rounds and just play the matchups or hopefully hit on somebody that is a sleeper. Kyler Murray goes in the 7th round. Phenomenal price tag on Kyler. I probably prefer Kyler Murray in the 7th in comparison to Anthony Richardson in the 5th. So if we go back and revisit our Anthony Richardson decision at the 503, the wide receiver we would have taken there instead would have been Tank Dell. So you can kind of do these 2-for-2s while you're doing these mock drafts. And we can revisit this and say, was it a mistake to take Anthony Richardson there in the 5th? Should we have gone Tank Dell and Kyler Murray? Or were we correct in going Anthony Richardson and Calvin Ridley? So please let me know in the comment section if you're watching this. That way for the next time, I'm maybe a little bit more well-informed. Would you rather have Anthony Richardson and Calvin Ridley, or would you rather have Tank Dell and Kyler Murray? But Raheem Mostert goes Hollywood Brown off the board here in the 7th. I do want to revisit DeAndre Hopkins, Hollywood Brown. These are wide receivers that go significantly earlier in this sleeper draft than what you'd expect in your ESPN, in your Yahoo drafts, which is why I was willing to reach a little bit on Jalen Waddle, which is why I was willing to reach a little bit on Nico Collins, so I don't have to be drafting DeAndre Hopkins. I don't have to take Jordan Addison. I don't have to take Hollywood Brown in round 7. But David Njoku off the board at the 805. Brock Bowers goes to the George Kittle team, which is very interesting. Now, we're not going to take another quarterback in the rest of this draft. If you are looking at a couple of these running backs, you have Nick Chubb, Austin Eckler, Jonathan Brooks, Jalen Warren, all available to you. Going over to wide receiver, you have Christian Watson, Brian Thomas, Jamison Williams, Cortland Sutton. If we end up getting Christian Watson making it to us, I think we will take Christian Watson, or we could also look at Jake Ferguson here. But one thing that we need to consider is the fact that the team after us already has Travis Kelce, so they're unlikely to take Jake Ferguson. I think we could potentially get Jake Ferguson on the way back around. Now, if it doesn't happen, it'll be a massive whiff. If this team here at pick 1 ends up taking Jake Ferguson from us, I'll take my L. I'll admit that it was a mistake, but they go Dak Prescott here. And let's really hope that they don't get Jake Ferguson, because if we're able to get Ferguson here at the beginning of the 9th, I will really like this team. They go Nick Chubb. Okay, perfect for us. So at this point, I think that we should be able to get Jake Ferguson because that team after us had Travis Kelce. And yeah, Devin Singletary off the board. So we're going to go ahead. We will get Jake Ferguson. Now at running back, we have Christian McCaffrey, Rashad White, Najee Harris. We have the elite quarterback in Anthony Richardson, or hopefully a very good quarterback with Anthony Richardson. Wide receiver, we have Nico Collins, Jalen Waddle, Calvin Ridley, Christian Watson. And then tight end, we have Jake Ferguson. I do want to revisit our decision, like we discussed previously, to avoid tight end in round 7. If we would have gone with tight end in round 7, just because we maybe panicked and didn't get one of the other tight ends that we were targeting, there we would have taken David Njoku or Brock Bowers. And honestly, I think I'd probably rather have Jake Ferguson straight up over those tight ends, and especially when we don't have to take him in round 7 and instead we get Ferguson in round 9. But here you have a bunch of these running backs going off the board. Spears, Brian Robinson, Jalen Warren, Gus Edwards, Jonathan Brooks. I think these are guys that are actually very strong values, and I don't fault you at all for going through and taking them. Now, one thing that you will notice on Sleeper in comparison to your Yahoo drafts, in comparison to your ESPN drafts, is these drafters are going to be a little bit smarter. And what you may find is you may find none of them taking kickers or defenses early. These kickers and defenses may essentially just all get drafted within the last 3 rounds. And specifically in that instance, it could make sense for you to go ahead and take an elite defense if you think you can get the defense number 1 at a reasonable price point later on. But Brock Purdy, Caleb Williams here, probably go a little bit too early. Chase Brown off the board. Like I said, we're not looking at quarterback. We're pretty much just running back, wide receiver. And we can definitely go with another tight end when our first tight end's off the board in round 9. Looking at the wide receivers available, I mean, the best guys are Myers, Leggett, Judy. The wide receivers in Sleeper here are pretty gross. I don't want to be taking them. So instead, we'll go ahead. We'll take Ezekiel Elliott as our 4th running back. No idea if Zeke's going to be any good. I don't think he is. But at the end of the day, what we can do here at the 10-11 turn is In rounds 10 and 11, we can essentially guarantee that we get all the Dallas Cowboys running back touches. So we can go ahead and we can take Ezekiel Elliott and Rico Dowdle here. And this is something else that is honestly just completely irrelevant to the exact draft platform that you're drafting on. I think you can carry this over to anywhere. But I don't like handcuffing running backs, specifically if you take a running back at the very top of the draft. So say you go ahead and you take Bijan Robinson round 1. I personally am not a fan of you then deciding, okay, let me reach on Tyler Algier just in case Bijan Robinson gets injured. Because if you're going to be the one team in your 12-team league to win it, you pretty much need Bijan Robinson to stay healthy, and you should chase the ceiling rather than the floor. Now, with that being said, do I mind taking 2 running backs in the same backfield when we're going with them in the double-digit rounds? 2 guys that should be in a very good offense? No, I do not mind that whatsoever. So if you get to the double-digit rounds and you just want to lock in running back production by going with Ezekiel Elliott, Rico Dowdle, I think it's something that you definitely can do. But I also want to revisit our decision, like we discussed, to reach maybe a little bit on wide receivers at the beginning of this draft, because now that we're getting to the end, the wide receiver position is going to be seeing that fall off. Now, another thing that I want to discuss here is if you're looking at it, we are in the last 4 rounds of this draft. We have to take a defense. We have to take a kicker. So really, we only have 2 more running backs, wide receivers, tight ends that we are able to take. And once you get to this point of the draft, the expectation is a lot of these guys that you draft, you are going to end up cutting. So this is about the point where I think that you're okay, if you really wanted to go ahead and to potentially take defense off the board and grab an elite DST, which is maybe exactly what we are going to do here at the 1303. Because like we discussed previously, and I showed all the math of this, the guy that you're going to take here has a good chance of getting cut anyway. So if we can just go ahead and lock up the San Francisco 49ers defense here in the 13th round, I think that's going to be okay. Now, I do want to remind you, I've seen Yahoo drafts, I've seen ESPN drafts, I've seen NFL fantasy drafts where the first defense off the board is not going to be going in rounds 13, 14, 15. Instead, the first defense off the board is going to be going in round 7 or 8. And for the love of God, if that is your league, stream the position. Do not take a top defense the way that we're doing. But if you get inside the last 3 rounds of your draft, and we acknowledge, okay, Elijah Mitchell's probably going to be someone that we cut anyway, then at that point, I think it's acceptable to just go ahead and take the elite level DST with the understanding of you really only need 1 more running back or receiver. That player is going to be the first guy off your roster once we get an interesting waiver wire pickup in week 1. If you think the Niners defense is elite, if you think the Jets defense is elite, might as well go ahead and grab them. Now, one thing that I definitely use in terms of looking for defenses that we should be targeting, I think it's very useful to look at sportsbook spreads, win totals, and a general rule of thumb that you want is you want a defense where their offense is going to be leading the majority of the game. Because if that offense is leading the majority of the game, then the opposing offense, the team going up against our defense, will have a ton of dropbacks. Not only will they have a ton of dropbacks, but it will give us the ability to get sacks as well as interceptions. If that makes sense. I'm probably just rambling here like an old man, but regardless, let's go ahead. Let's move this down. We still need a kicker. We still need either a running back or wide receiver. Here in the last few rounds, we're going to be looking for a running back or a wide receiver that we'd feel comfortable cutting after week 1 if we don't like his role. So taking someone like Jermaine Burton does absolutely nothing for us. So we want a running back that we're going to get a clear outline of his role week 1. So we're going to take Ray Davis at the 14-10. And if it looks like he's not the running back 2 behind James Cook, then at that point, I think you could pivot over and you could potentially move on from him for an interesting waiver wire pickup after the first week. But let's go ahead and let's grab a tight end. I don't care about tight ends. I don't know anything about these guys. Cameron Dicker, hook 'em horns. That's all I got to say. We'll go ahead and we'll load them up. Looking at this team, so at running back, we have CMC, Rashad White, Najee Harris, Ezekiel Elliott, Rico Dowdle, Ray Davis. Wide receiver, we only have Nico Collins, Jalen Waddle, Calvin Ridley, Christian Watson. I do want to remind y'all, the bottom end of this team, such as Ray Davis, Rico Dowdle, Ezekiel Elliott, these will be guys that we could potentially churn during the season to pick up waiver wire production at wide receiver, but I think that we are good weeks 1, 2, and 3 with the wide receiver group that we currently have. Now, I really hope that I was able to help you out here. And of course, if you wanted to get into a draft with us, I'm streaming every single night on the live stream. We are doing Underdog Fantasy drafts because there's no time commitment during the year. It's the best spot to get in an extra fantasy football league. And yeah, I draft hundreds of teams there every year. I won $150,000 2 years ago. And if you use code FLOCK, you're going to get a 50% deposit match up to $250. You'll get my 2024 rankings, 2024 draft guide, and 2024 ADP consensus cheat sheet, which I use to make this video, all three of which will be updated every single week for you. Plus, you'll get a Christian McCaffrey special pick of more than less than half total yards, so make sure you take advantage of that. Last but not least, the Flock meetup is coming up extremely fast. If you're interested, make sure you go to flockfantasy.store. It's this Thursday in Austin, Texas. Flockfantasy.store if you want to grab a ticket. Should be a ton of fun. I'll be there, as well as a ton of other fantasy football YouTubers. But thank you. Really do appreciate you and really hope I can draft with you tonight.